Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Klaus, for these very nice words. It's nice to hear that from your boss in public. It was very enlightening to hear concrete examples, this concrete example of Bayer and the BAWA standardization initiative for a specific case. I think this is the kind of thing we are very grateful to hear from the Commission side when looking forward, when looking in the future how to improve the process. That's what I would like to talk about, to give you a bit the few reflections from the Commission side on how we see where we are and especially where we want to go towards. How do we see this moving forward? And when talking about moving forward, we should always keep, of course, the north. We should know where north is. And where is north in REACH authorization terms? For us, north is, of course, Article 55. I'll hammer it once again. This is something we all know, but I think we should always keep in mind two main goals of authorization is to ensure proper control of risks from the use of SVHCs on the one hand, and that as long as we cannot substitute the substance, because one of the main goals, of course, is to replace SVHCs progressively by suitable alternatives when economically and technically viable. And third objective of authorization, let's not forget, this is a one-stop shop. Authorization is something you apply for in one place, which is ECHA, and where you get the final result from the Commission, and is valid for the whole EEA within the scope, of course, of the decision. So, sum up, ultimately, substitution is the goal, and that is something that we need to keep in mind. But it's not all that simple, and it's maybe also useful to recall what we do not want to achieve with authorization. What should we be watchful for in this process? We do not want authorization to be a process where companies with deep pockets can apply and they get their authorization, and small players cannot afford it. They abandon certain uses just because they cannot afford it, not because they can substitute, but maybe they cannot substitute either. We do not want to substitute EU production by imported finished goods either. We want to keep production in Europe. We should not forget that. We don't want a burdensome and costly bureaucratic procedure. And it is worrying when we hear that there are cases where this is indeed. But we don't want to postpone substitution longer than necessary either. So we don't want authorization to be a way to escape substitution when there are alternatives that are viable. We don't want to discourage substitution. We don't want to discourage businesses from producing and from using safer alternatives either. And we do not want to substitute with potential SVHCs. We have heard a case where the substitution program was stopped because the potential substitute was actually going to be classified as a CMR. So finally, we do not want to discourage innovation. So there are a lot of things we don't want in this process, but as you can see, they go in different directions, and at the end of the day, I think it is for the authorities, a balancing act. We want to encourage substitution, but we want to keep business in Europe, and we want to make sure that the process of authorizing, where it is the only option to, because there are no substitutes, we want that to be also a possibility. We don't want to make that too burdensome either. So where do we see the problem? I think applying for authorization now, for the Commission, is clear that it is costly and burdensome. This is something that we have heard many, many times. We have had many meetings with companies. We see actually what is the cost of applying. And even though we see a positive trend going downwards, we are building on experience, we still think that there might be scope for improvement. Why do we think it is so costly and burdensome today? Well, the scope of authorization is very broad. As Klaus said yesterday, until now we had authorization processes in the EU for many different products, but it was focused on specific uses like biocides, plant protection products, we have food contact materials. But here we have a very broad scope. Basically, authorization covers all uses unless they're exempted. And that's very broad. And also very broad range of operators. It's not only an obligation for the manufacturer or the importer, it can also, a downstream user can apply. There might be a use where the importer does not want to apply, and it is for the downstream user to actually take the initiative. And that might be a very small company at the end of the day. Or we have the case, for example, of recyclers, where they're considered manufacturers under REACH. But these might be very small companies. They don't have upstream somebody who will apply for them. So it can be quite challenging, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises. Then it's, again, we all know that, but it's new requirements, relatively broadly described and demanding with regard to information obligations that are expected from applicants. Some elements are not regulated in detail in the regulation in REACH, like the analysis of alternatives and the SEA. Yes, we have a lot of guidance. Some might say it's too much guidance. Where are the bare necessities? Maybe that's, again, a pending issue for us to be more clear about. External expertise may be needed. We have now heard well that this is indeed for some operators a must. Supply chain coordination, I think it's obvious to everybody this is a starting point. You don't get anywhere if you don't start there. And the applicant, as I said, is not necessarily the manufacturer or the importer up in the supply chain. It might be actually the very small operator at the end of the chain who might not be acquainted at all with REACH. And finally, we don't have much experience. Industry doesn't have experience. We don't have experience either. And we need to build cases. We need to build some reference cases that people can look back to and say, oh, that's how you do that in this specific case. So what are we going to do, or what are we doing from the Commission side to solve it? Well, we all know REACH is a very broad legislation. It was very innovative. It created a lot of new requirements. And the legislator did not foresee all the details, could not anticipate all the potential gaps or all the potential needs to address questions that could come along the way. That's, of course, the work of the authorities to fill in those gaps. And we have three main areas where we have, and we are working to fill in those gaps or improve the situation. The first one is on legal interpretation and guidance. This is something, well, I will elaborate further on later, but this is something that we have very much shared with ECHA. The second point is maybe already moving towards the future, trying to streamline and simplify authorization application procedures where in specific cases this has become very clear in concrete cases. And then a third, maybe also looking more towards the future, try to streamline authorization applications in a more general way for all of them across the board, more fit for purpose. Legal interpretation and guidance, this is something we have been doing along the way, of course. I mean, this is the least we could do when there are questions popping up along the way. And there, as I said, we have worked hand in hand with ECHA by trying to clarify questions on, for example, the scope of authorization and in particular the exemptions. For example, are upstream uses from R&D use covered by the exemption, yes or no? Another case we have clarified is whether ORs can apply, because REACH does not say anything about that. It is only linked to registration, so we have tried to clarify this point as well. Or, for example, we have had a reflection on what should the criteria be for defining review periods? And that is something that, again, we did together with ECA, and that we think has at least increased clarity and predictability of what could be expected from different decisions. There is still, of course, a lot of clarification needed in other cases, and more will come, I am sure. We have, from the Commission side at least, still the feeling that maybe there is more need for guidance, I don't dare to use the word, I should say, more clarity on how to describe the applied for use, especially when it's upstream that this happens. I think we all agree downstream it can be quite specific, but upstream it gets more blurry, and how broad can you be in your description of the use in your application. Reference to risk management measures related to worker exposure. This is an element on which we are internally discussing in the Commission, because you know that there is already a body of legislation out there for many, many years on worker protection. This is still there, it's still in place and valid and applicable. And there is a lot of it that fits into REACH, of course. But we need to see how best to integrate both, so that for operators, maybe whatever is done under OSH can be translated directly into REACH or not. How can we best combine both of them to reduce the burden for the applicants? And another element is the analysis of alternatives, the suitability and availability of alternatives, the clarity on how is this assessed, of course, for the applicant, that is clear, but also for downstream users, this should be there when the applicant is upstream, is not the actual user, and this is something maybe that needs more clarity. The second point, looking to the future as well, is the specific cases. We have started small when looking at how to improve the application procedure, because we have been encountering specific cases where industry tells us this is maybe too burdensome, maybe we need here to improve things. So we have started with very specific cases, and in particular the 4 I have listed in the slide: uses in low volumes, uses in legacy spare parts, uses in products subject to type approval, and uses as biologically essential elements. You might be aware that the Commission issued a communication last summer on refit, where already we announced that this would be looked into, trying to lower the administrative burden in specific cases, not going into the specific examples, but the general idea of looking already how to lower this burden. And to move forward this work, we have, together with ECA, a task force on simplification of AFA, of applications for authorization. This task force has, besides ECA and Commission members, it also has representatives from RAC, SEAC, and competent authorities. And it has proved very useful in actually dissecting almost the different templates, CSR, AOA, and SEA, to look at where can we lighten up the requirements, the documentation requirements for specific cases. We have started with the low volume uses, where the rationale for any streamlining or simplification has been the disproportionality between the cost of a full-scale application and the potential benefits for human health and environment. This is something on which the task force has been working in the last few months and developed some draft templates for both CSR and a joint AOA-SEA template, and on which we have recently, last week, launched a public consultation. You have the link to this public consultation on the Europa website on the slide. This public consultation is aimed at getting feedback from stakeholders on whether we are going in the right direction, whether this is going to to really do something for those cases. And there, this consultation is on the one hand on the scope of what we want to cover. On the one hand, we have suggested different possibilities for maximum volume limit of what could be considered a low volume, and there we're talking about kilos, 10 kilos, 100 kilos, but this is something which is also part of the question to the public. What do you think about that? What we are thinking is that this volume should be per legal entity, so not per use. It should be per legal entity and per year. And applications should be limited to own uses applications, not applications for your downstream users, but for the legal entity who is applying. And we are thinking also of excluding cases where there is a potential consumer exposure in the life cycle of the substance, to really keep it very, very simple. Also for the committees afterwards to assess the case. We want to make it very simple cases. This is coupled, as I said, with simplified information requirements, which are indicated in these draft templates for CSR and analysis of alternatives and socioeconomic analysis, which we have provided also as part of the consultation, and on which it would be very useful to get comments for those who are interested, of course. The second initiative I mentioned for specific cases where we would like to simplify or consider less documentation in applications is the case of legacy spare parts. By legacy spare parts, we mean spare parts of articles intended to repair articles that where the production stopped before the sunset date. So articles that are no longer in the production line. This is because we feel there is a clear disproportionality between the requirements of a full-fledged application, looking also in particular for alternatives, for uses intended for articles that are no longer in production. So we think that the burden for finding alternatives in a case where the production is going of the spare part is going down anyway, and for articles that are no longer being produced, might be too much, might be disproportionate. Also, we feel that this might create a risk for the availability of spare parts on the market and lead to early disposal of articles before the end of their lifetime, which of course should be avoided. And it is also something that was already recognized in other legislation, in the End-of-Life Directive, in the ROS Directive. Here, in those two directives, this was introduced as a means of an exemption for this kind of articles. In REACH, we don't have that luxury to provide for an exemption without reopening the regulation. So we have tried to be a bit imaginative on how to deal with this in the future so that we can still lower the burden, but still within the current legal framework. So what we are having in mind is in the first, as a first step, is to extend the transitional periods for the substances in Annex 14, which are concerned by uses in legacy spare parts. So looking at the 31 substances that are today in Annex 14, we would like to know which ones are really concerned by this. We already know, for example, DHP is one of those cases in the car sector, but there may be others. And this is part of also this public consultation I was just referring to. We would like to know which substances are actually an issue for this, so that we can extend the latest application date and the sunset date for these cases, for these substances. This would be the first stage, the first step in this approach. At the end, what we want to do is, again, simplify the process significantly for these cases as well. But until we get there, we would like to give some breathing space because there are already sunset days coming up and we might not be on time. Another specific case, as I mentioned, is the case of type approval and uses as biological essential elements. There, we are not so advanced yet. We have not included those in the public consultation. In the case of type approval and certification, this concerns uses of substances where substituting to another substance would require the product type approval or certification to be reopened, to be subject to a new approval or a modification in the approval certificate. This is, for example, potentially the case in sectors that are very highly regulated, like aerospace. We have had already discussions in the task force on this. We have had also dialogue with industry, with some sectors where this is very much their daily business, the type approval or type certification. And we need a further discussion still at the policy level. We're planning to do that in the next Caracal in March to see where we move forward, because we think also this is a clear case where this type of approval process difficulties might also be considered as part of the socioeconomic analysis, of course. And the last case, a specific case we are having in mind, uses as biological essential elements. This is a case where substitution might be by the sheer nature of the substance impossible. However, we don't have, with the current substances in Annex 14, we don't have yet this case coming up. So for the moment, we are not advanced, but we keep it in our to-do list for sure.
Time is up, actually.
Okay. Then I'll be very, very quick. General streamlining of application for authorization procedure. That's the next stage, the next thing we would like to do. And I think yesterday and today are very useful for us to get some ideas on where we should be looking at, what we should be looking at. And of course, here we have more questions than answers from the Commission side. And there we would like to know concrete elements. Where is the CSR or the analysis of alternatives or the SEA? Where are elements that are really necessary, and where can we, let's say, cut the fat? So next step, for low volume uses, our idea is to adopt an implementing act, or propose an implementing act. It's not only up to us at the end of the day, concerning a simplified procedure, which would have to go coupled with a reduction of the fees. For legacy spare parts, as I said, we would have a two-step approach. First, a one-time extension of the transitional arrangements for Annex 14 substances concerned by this type of uses, and then future simplification. And for other specific cases and general simplification, we have a discussion planned in the next Caracal. Thank you very much for your attention.